All right, last segment. We're going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite comic strips, and it's Calvin and Hobbes. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because my lovely girlfriend, who just out of the kindness of her own heart, it wasn't even my birthday or anything, bought me the hardcover complete box set of Calvin and Hobbes.
I can see it. It's sitting right over there on
and it's awesome. And you know, I have such great memories.
Hardbound. It's those gorgeous.
It's heavy, dude. The whole thing is heavy. It probably weighs like 25 to 30 pounds.
Like, is it? Does it have gold on it? It looks like it might
maybe
have
a little
gold.
bit in the writing, but dude, Calvin and Hobbes has such a special place in my heart. I don't know how much you read Calvin and Hobbes growing up. Or if you did you read any of the books, or did you just read it in the paper?
I, when it was still being made, would read it in the paper. And I read several of the collections. But I've read far from all of them.
Right. Now, I have read all of it. My parents owned a bookstore when I was a kid, and I remember just my mom at some point giving me Something Under the Bed is Drooling. Which was the second Calvin and Hobbes collection. And I just kind of fell in love with it, man. Because of just the art style is great. I think the concept of a kid with an imaginary friend, you know, is really cool and unique way to do a comic strip. And I think the way that Bill Watterson captured Calvin's imagination as a child was fantastic. That being said, reading these strips in my 30s now, because I've read through a lot of these in the books since she got it for me, reading them in my 30s, I have a whole new level of appreciation for Calvin and Hobbes than I did when I was a kid. Because when you're a kid, you think some things are funny and some things are gross out funny, but a lot of it really goes over your head.
Yeah.
You know, like when Calvin's talking to his dad about the poles, and I totally relate to Calvin's dad more than I ever thought I would. And there's certain comic strips that make me laugh out loud now that I never thought were that funny when I was a kid. Like, there's this one in particular that I think about now, where Calvin is just banging nails into the coffee table. And the mom runs in and she's like, "What are you doing?" And he looks down at the table for one panel and there's no dialogue. And then he looks at her in the next panel. He's like, "Is this some sort of trick question or what?" That just, for some reason, you know, as a kid, I didn't really understand why that was so funny. But as an adult, I'm like, that's hilarious because he's totally right. You're like, you see exactly what I'm doing. Why would you even ask? You know, the proper question would be, why the hell are you nailing nails into my coffee table?
Yeah.
And it's those things. It's awesome because it's something that I found so much joy and appreciation in reading when I was a kid, and now I'm rediscovering it on a whole other level as an adult. And I would really encourage anyone who read these, if it's been 10, 15 years since you've read them, dude, do yourself a favor and pick up some of those books again, because there's so many layers to that. And I also appreciate the art so much more now that I'm an adult. But yeah, you know, it played a huge role in my love for humor. You know, you and I were at a big comic book store and we passed the book section, and we passed by the humor section. I was like, that's my section right there. In every bookstore I go to, I always go to the humor section. I love reading comic strips, and Calvin and Hobbes played a big role in that. I remember whenever I worked for Olive Garden back in Springfield, I didn't have a car, so I had to ride the bus to work. And they were right next to a Barnes & Noble, so I would intentionally get on the earlier bus
so you could stop.
So I could go to Barnes & Noble, and I would go to the humor section and pick up a book and just read. I read all the Boondocks comic strips. Those are great. Another one of my favorite comic strips is Foxtrot. I don't know if you ever read that.
Yeah,
I really relate to the Jason Fox character in there because he's a super nerd. You know, The Far Side.
Yeah.
Bloom County. You know, with Opus the penguin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Bill the cat. You know, there's a lot of those things. And, you know, my dad had some comic strip collections like BC by Johnny Hart. I read a lot of that.
BC was great.
Yeah, and Wizard of Id. So, you know, that really kind of sparked a lot of that. And it sucks to see that, you know, newspapers are kind of dying out. But at the same time, I'm loving seeing the fact that there's a Cyanide Happiness book. Yeah. You know, at the bookstore. So
see, that's the thing.
Web comics are like a big thing now.
Comic strips have like they're still being made. Like you can get the Sunday paper and you'll still see full color sheets of comic strips, current comic strips. But web comics have been on the forefront of new actual comics for what, 15 years now?
Probably.
I remember reading the old stuff on nuclear power, which nuclear power hasn't updated anything in years now. Brian Clevenger was the artist and the writer for those, but he did the entire story of the original Final Fantasy game as a webcomic.
Oh, wow.
And it's hilarious.
I'll have to check that. Is it still available online?
Yeah, no, Nuclear Power is still online. You can go to it, NUKLEAR power.com, yeah.
I read a lot of Dilbert.
Yeah,
too.
Scott Adams.
Which sucks,
Adams.
dude. Oh, man.
He's very conservative.
He is super pro-Trump. And I'm just like, fuck this guy.
Yeah, I read a business book of his when I was a kid because it had Dilbert on the cover. I was like, hey, this is going to be funny because it's got Dilbert on the cover. It's a business book.
I read Dogbert's like management handbook. Mm-hmm. I had a bunch of Dilbert books. I also got, Scott Adams wrote a book called God's Debris. That I read. It's like a small book. I think I still have it, and it's interesting. But Calvin and Hobbes really takes the cake for me on as far as what I think the best comic strip is. And if there's a documentary out called Dear Mr. Watterson, and they mention in there, they're like, you don't meet people that hate that comic strip.
I have never met a single person that just really dislikes Calvin and Hobbes.
You're probably like, if you hate Calvin and Hobbes, you're probably like the worst person in the world.
Yeah, I feel like that's accurate. If you really, really don't have never read a single, or even if you have never read Calvin and Hobbes, but like if I were to show you one, at least if you chuckle, you're fine. But if you hate Calvin and Hobbes, you're probably awful.
I like how Calvin and Hobbes has found some new life in Donald and
Hobbes,
which started off as a subreddit, and people just started taking Calvin and Hobbes strip and posting Donald Trump's face on Calvin. And some of them are funnier than others, but I thought that was really funny, and now I'm starting to see them being shared on Facebook and stuff like that. I will say that, I understand where Bill Watterson came from when he decided not to license out the characters for television, movies, and toys and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, as a kid, I always just really wished there had been like a Calvin and Hobbes movie. Yeah. Or a cartoon or something like that.
It still pisses me off when I see Calvin peeing stuff.
Oh yeah, because it's bootleg. You know it's not. It's not how it should be.
Do not ever buy Calvin peeing on anything, right? Because Bill Watterson doesn't get any of that money. That is just some asshole being an asshole, and really, you're an asshole because Calvin peeing on stuff is dumb.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Anytime I've seen anybody with Calvin pissing on a Ford or Chevy logo or whatever, I just automatically assume the person who put that on the car is a fucking piece
asshole.
Of shit.
Yeah, If you have a Calvin peeing on something decal, you're probably an awful person.
Yeah, you're most likely an awful person, and you probably voted for Donald Trump. I'm just saying. But anyway, I just kind of wanted to like gush about that for a little bit. Right. We were a little short on content. And I was like, hey, let's just talk about how much I love this.
And this whole conversation reminds me of when I was a kid. I would go to my grandpa's house for Christmas usually. Yeah. And he had big, giant, like they were probably 1.5 feet tall and, 2 or 3 inches thick. And there was a 2-volume set of every single Far Side comic ever.
I love Far Side. Yeah. Far Side is great because it's so absurd.
I would go to his house and I would read those books. Like that would be all I would do while I was at my grandpa's house is I would read this full 2-volume set of every Far Side ever made.
Yeah, I had a lot of comic strip collection books. Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of Garfield books when I was a kid.
As a kid, I didn't really read a whole lot of Garfield, but I just remember so many times just laying in my room, sideways on my bed, with my head hanging off the side of the bed, with the book on the floor, and reading them like that. Mostly Calvin and Hobbes and Foxtrot, Dilbert,
Yeah.
Bloom County, Far Side, things like that. But, what's your favorite comic strip? People listening at home, let us know in the comments below. It's about time to wrap it up, Chris.
Yep. Let's, we'll go ahead and finish up for today. We've got still a bunch more movies, especially next week coming out. So we're going to have probably a couple of movie reviews.
And what sucks is, I've got some vacation time that I'm taking next week, but I'm also going to be out of town a little bit, too. So I'm really hoping I can fit everything into this short schedule. So,
right. We're going to,
it's going to be a
quick turnaround next weekend to get all the movies in.
Feel free to spoil stuff for me, Chris. I won't be upset.
All right. We've got movie reviews next week. Just make sure you tune in to episode 32. In the meantime, make sure you like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily segments and full episodes on Sundays.
That's right.
And have yourself a good week. Make sure you come back next week.